morning and good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's installment of Changemakers Bite Size. Today, I'm delighted to invite Robin Jakes to speak on a purpose-driven strategy and aligning your teams for success. So, Robin, over to you.
Thanks, Jordan, and hello to everybody from wherever you are. Thanks for making the time to attend Changemakers Bite Size. It's a pleasure to talk to you all. I'll start off our session by just introducing an agenda so you get a sense as to how we are going to structure our time together. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why purpose is important and what it is in an organizational context, and just to get you interested, some wise words from football, if there are any football fans on the call. We'll then talk a little bit after we've done that about ways to unearth purpose, and I'll share some personal experiences of some work that we've done over the years, and some of the ways that we've focused on helping organizations really get a sense of what their purpose is, and also people within the organization. And then the really pivotal bit for me then is, once you've done that great thinking about purposes, then how do you deploy it into the organization? So how do we take it so that it starts to shape performance, behavior, starts to reward people, and this is getting into the land of deployment. So that's the journey that we're going to go on. I'll finish off with a couple of personal examples towards the end of the session, and then some questions for you as well around how purpose might work in your organization. Okay, so let's get into it, as they say. So I'm going to start off with a picture of Gareth Southgate. So for those of you not in the UK, this is the England football manager. And it's funny, it's interesting how things sometimes fall into your lap. I was looking at LinkedIn yesterday, and this post from Gareth Southgate, which I've abridged quite heavily on this slide, popped up. And in it, Gareth kind of talking about where he's going next in his career. He ends in the line, so if you're at a similar crossroads, I wish you well. I will be putting purpose high on my list of considerations, because in those difficult moments we all face, the purpose will keep us going. So he's concluding a narrative that starts off about he's had a fantastic time running the English football team. He's taking time to reflect on what he's achieved and what he did. The thing that he's going to perhaps find hardest to replicate is this sense of purpose that he had when he was doing the job, where he felt he had a responsibility to improve English football, and it guided him through his travels, his public speaking, difficult moments and heartbreaking defeats, and also great successes. And it kept him on track. It gave him structure. It gave him fulfillment, and he openly admits it's going to be extremely difficult to replicate, but it's a real fundamental part of what he's looking for as he moves into the next part of whatever he ends up doing. I've always had enormous amount of respect for this fella. You know, as a football fan, I'd loved him to have won the World Cup or the European Cup. He didn't, but he did something quite fundamental for English football, changing its performance and its culture. And the fact that this popped into my lap yesterday morning, I thought it's too good an opportunity to miss. In football parlance, it's an open goal, and even I can tap them in from 5 yards. So there's Gareth Southgate talking about how important purpose has been to him in his work. So what do we mean by this thing? I think for me, purpose is about finding meaning and building worth for people in the organization. So people increasingly want to come to work thinking that work has, it's not just a task, it's some form of higher order meaning. It's creating value for them as individuals. So the things that they do at work and the intent of their organizations connect with the things that are meaningful for them. And for most of us, if you're going to generalize meaning means I'm growing, I'm learning, I'm able to do more for my family or society or community. I'm doing something which is a higher order of thing than just doing work. Okay, so purpose is a kind of emotional and meaning thing. If you do research on purpose, there's plenty of stuff out there that tells us that organizations that are purpose-driven organizations have better outcomes for the people who work in them. So these 3 studies here psychosomatic medicine, less incidence of cardiovascular diseases in purpose-driven organizations, Uni of Pennsylvania, better outcomes through COVID for purpose-driven organizations, and recent research by the University of Sussex, purpose people were happier and more productive. So let's say people's life chances are improved in organizations that are clear about purpose and in a way that people connect with that purpose and it has meaning for them. There's also good data emerging quite consistently about performance of the organizations as well. So there's a recent study by Great Places to Work. This is the organization that looks at measuring and analyzing organizational cultures. And it found that companies where employees experience a sense of purpose outperform the stock market. Fantastic. By a reasonable amount. We'd all be, I sure, be a lot happier if our funds were going up 7% more than the funds that other people chose to invest in. So it's not an insignificant amount of money. And the Harvard Business Review identified a number of areas where businesses that were purpose-driven were also outperforming. Okay, productivity, growth, product launch performance, etc., etc. So that for me, there's a lot of evidence coming through that says that purpose drives to better personal outcomes and also better business outcomes. And I use this story to illustrate the fact that this idea of a purpose isn't something new. It's been around for a long time. Okay, so this is a story that I'm sure we all know. This is the John F. Kennedy, the fable, because it may not be true, from the Space Center, which is Kennedy talking to a guy in the loos, and the gentleman says, I'm here to put a man on the moon, connecting with the higher purpose and intent of the organization. But the meaningful bit for me is that these astronauts won't have access to doctors and medicines up in space, so it's important for them to be healthy. I'm working to keep this place as clean as possible so that nothing happens to them that might make them sick. Okay, lovely little story, isn't it? But it's really about purpose at macro becoming purpose for an individual. And for me, it's a human thing. That man is talking about meaning. And he's talking about it in a way that says that he's emotionally connected to it and engaged with it in the workplace. And so purpose leads on to a little bit of something for leaders to reflect on, which is one of the leadership challenges when we're talking in the space of purpose is that we're able to articulate good stories about why our organizations exist. We're able to articulate good, repeatable, consistent stories, and we're able to do it in a way that means that it can resonate with people in the organization. So it's not about KPIs and performance charts and things like that. It's about stories of the future, and it's about why our organizations exist, why they're fundamentally important, and what that means to people within the organization. So there's a leadership challenge for us to reflect on in that space. There's also, I think, a challenge with purpose to get the balance right between probably a more scientific approach to organizational thinking, where we're trying to align people to organizational intent. This is going up the left-hand side of this little 2x2 matrix, versus a more emotional and behavioral side of organizational thinking, where we're trying to engage people with the why of our organizations and what they're trying to achieve. The reality for me is that we need to get both of these right. We need to create a sense that people are aligned and are clear about the things that they've got to achieve, but we've also got to do it in a way that emotionally connects them to those things, so they have real meaning and resonance with them. And when they have real meaning and resonance, people tend to put a bit more of themselves into the organization because they know they're going to get something back which starts to describe something about who they are as an individual and what they stand for. And if we get those two things working, where we've got really good alignment and really good engagement and emotional connection, then we're moving our organization up into the performing place for the business and the rewarding place for people within it. And hopefully some of those stats from some of the earlier slides start to demonstrate that a little bit. So a little bit of background to purpose. I thought I'd take the opportunity with this slide to talk a little bit about an example. So I'm going to talk about an ink making example, and then we're going to come on and talk about an example in the cargo handling and logistics sector. So the first one, the ink example, is a Midwest business that produced ink that was used in consumer packaging, so used in largely in food packaging. And we were contracted into that business initially to look at, let's say, performance and productivity. And what became clear almost immediately was that they had a real big cultural problem, and they were shedding labour. They were shedding labour in an economic setting which had pretty high employment. So there wasn't an awful lot of spare labour to go after. So this was creating a bit of a problem in the organisation. So we got permission from the leadership team to start to have some initial exploratory conversations with people across the direct and indirect labour pools in the business about what that issue was about, because there's not a lot you can do with productivity if you haven't got the people to be able to create those performance outcomes. And there was one conversation I had with one of the guys which really summarised it up for me, and I won't do it in a Midwest drawl because I can't, but he said something like, hey, well, look, 4 or 5 years ago, I used to go home from work and tell my kids that I'd been making McDonald's red today, or I'd been making the orange that goes into Uncle Ben's boxes, the Uncle Ben's orange, in that he'd come home from work and he'd talk to his family and his children about the ink that he'd been making and the fact that it resonated with him and it meant something to him. And then he said to me, and then we introduced SAP, and all the works orders that started to come down on the shop floor just used a 15-digit code, and it all started to mean nothing to me anymore. It's just a job. I just do tasks, I move stuff around, I mix stuff, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't really care about it anymore. And it was really quite emotional in a negative sort of way. So we checked that story out with other people around the business, and it was pretty consistent in that what had happened over that 4 or 5 year period was that they'd just, I think, accidentally disconnected people from making things that they could identify, recognize, and that resonated with them and they could take some pride in. So we started a set of different conversations, which was, when this business was doing something with a purpose that you could remember and that you connected with, what was that purpose? How could you describe it? And I thought a quite curious expression started to emerge. And the more I thought about it, I thought actually it has some meaning. They started talking about the fact that they felt like they were, in their words, bringing ink to life. They were bringing ink to life. They were making ink and they were bringing it to life through the vehicle of the products that it was being applied to. So that the Bringing Ink to Life organization was born. And hey, it was pretty simple to reverse some of the things in that organization. So it wasn't that difficult to put names into SAP so that products had names. It wasn't too difficult to start to bring some of the products they made back into the staff canteen, into the vending machines and other things. And it wasn't too difficult for the sales team to start to do show and tell and displays about the new wins that they'd made in the consumer and food marketplace, and start to engage the direct workers with some of the products they'd made. And lo and behold, that business started to fix its productivity problem and started to perform, and its shedding labor started to fall off. So bringing ink to life was their purpose, and then what came from that was some of the ways to bring that to life. The other example I'm going to use is a company called APM Terminals, where we used this idea of a world cafe, which I'll just talk about in a second. APM Terminals is a port in Georgia, in the Caucasus. It's the biggest port in the region. It services Georgia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, those types of countries on the Black Sea. Previously, government facility, Soviet facility, had been bought by APM, and they had some performance problems to overcome. We used an idea of world cafes, which is a series of working areas where people get to discuss strategy issues, performance issues, and often grievance issues as well. So both the negative and the positive in facilitated sessions. And in this example, we put probably somewhere in the order of 200 or 300 people through different sessions discussing the strategy, some of the issues that were blocking it, but really starting to engage with the big why. Why did this organization exist in the area that it was trading? And it was a massive success. So these guys came to the conclusion that their big why, which is on the first slide here, was to ensure the growth and development of their people, their customers, and the communities we support. And I think for most of the employees in the sessions, the real big why was the last bit. If APM was successful, it was the biggest employer in the region with higher value jobs than most of the other employers around. And they wanted APM to do more in terms of building community, so to give them time and not necessarily a lot of money, but to give them time to help support their schools and some of the other parts of the community. As that bit of strategic thinking and that why started to emerge, you could see the dynamics, the nature in the room really started to change. And people really started to connect with the strategy, the things they had to do in that strategy to deliver that part, which was, for a lot of people, community support was the higher order why, and things like servicing customers came as a result of the fact that they were delivering the strategy and they were doing some amazing things. By 2022, this facility had won APM Group's Terminal Port of the Year, and they were planning to apply for a Shingo Prize in 2025. Unfortunately, that noisy neighbour, Russia, and its misadventures into the Ukraine have put paid to that. But the result still is a very high performing facility with a real big input into community support around it. So again, another example of I suppose, not having a linear way to unearth purpose, but doing it through lots of well-intentioned and sensitive discussions. So final bit of the session, there's a lot of language in the world of strategy, and we're starting off using this idea of purpose. What do we do and why? It's kind of in many ways a little bit analogous to the mission of an organization. And then as you go down the strategic cascade, you get things like vision, which is where we're going to be, strategy, what the top level plans that we need to work on to get us there. And then there's a pivotal bit in strategic language that sometimes we call it critical success factors and KPIs. Sometimes it gets called strategic objectives or strategic capabilities, but the critical success factors are the kind of translation point in terms of being able to take creative, big picture and emotional thinking around purpose, vision and strategy and turn it into tangible things in the organization. Okay, so the next slide, our critical success factors are the kind of vital few areas that we must excel at in order to secure the purpose. They're the things that we need in layman's terms to be bloody good at day in, day out to achieve our purpose. Okay, there's normally 6 or 8 or 10 things that describe the things an organization needs to excel at, like delivering exemplary operational performance, like hiring and finding the talent that it needs to fill its vacancies, those types of things. But what you get with CSFs is they then allow you to move on to the place that says, well, if we've taken something a little bit tenuous like purpose and vision, we've turned it into some clear statements of things we need to be good at like CSFs, we can now move on to things that we need to measure. Okay, so it moves from the least tangible to the most tangible, and that's the role of critical success factors in a kind of strategy deployment process, is to say, well, if we want to deliver this purpose, this intent for the organization, what are the things that we need to excel at day in, day out to get us there? Okay, can we describe them? And if we can describe them, then surely we can measure them as well. And it starts to inform your measure set and the things that you use in the organization. Some of you might be familiar with Start With Why by Simon Sinek. It's quite a popular video. If you're not, I'd encourage you to have a look at it. And I probably won't do it justice by talking over it, but Simon uses this idea of the golden circle and the fact that starting with why, understanding why we exist or why an organization exists, actually plays to the emotional place in our brain. And then by getting the emotional place in our brain fired up, we can then rationalize the why into things like hows and whats, features and benefits and KPIs and performance metrics. But people understand why they exist because they always relate back to an emotional connection. What we find in deployment a lot, strategy deployment, which is using this little picture here, is too often people start with measures and KPIs. And we see lots of measures and KPIs in organizations that are poorly focused on and poorly loved. and often ignored and often out of date. And that's often because people don't understand why they exist or have an emotional connection. They don't have a meaning for them. Whereas if you do your deployment work by saying, well, actually, we've defined purpose, the why, for the area or for the team or for the organization, and then we've worked on the things that we need to excel at to achieve our why, and then we've decided to turn those into measures, then what you end up with is a set of measures that people have an emotional connection to and a degree of understanding. And if they've got an emotional connection, more times than not, that's a positive emotional connection, and people want to perform and achieve more against those measures. So the sequence of deployment and the connection to why is really important in terms of playing to how people's brains are wired. So, and if you want to learn a little bit more about that, I'd encourage you to go and find that video by Simon Sinek. It's on YouTube, so go and have a look at it. It'll explain a little bit of the neuroscience that sits behind that particular piece that I've just been through. I said I was going to finish off with a couple of personal anecdotes. We're getting kind of towards the end of the session. So a couple of things for me that play out in my personal world about purpose. I don't often share SA partners stories in client situations or on these types of sessions, but I will make an exception and use one here because I think it's quite a good example. So we'll all remember COVID, I'm sure. I can still remember late January, early February 2020, when it seemed to be starting to emerge in lots of people's thinking that if COVID continued in the direction of travel it was heading, we were heading for a lockdown. That's when we first started hearing these words that we'd never heard before, lockdown. And I can remember sitting with the leadership team of SA Partners thinking to ourselves, dear God, this is going to be a catastrophe. We were a business that generated 98% of our revenue by being in other people's businesses. Can you imagine the consequence of a lockdown that would have hit our organization? So we started to put plans in place and think about, well, what's important here as we enter this unknown and uncharted territory. And the first piece that we all agreed on was that whatever happened, our purpose as an organization and a leadership team was to keep everybody that we respected in our business, which is all of the partners and employees, in employment. We didn't want to stand anybody down. We didn't want to make anybody redundant. We didn't want to put anybody on furlough. We wanted everybody to be employed and to be active through this turbulent and traumatic period. Now, in order to do that, to have that place where we kept everybody employed, we had to take some pretty radical measures. So we talked to the organization about that full employment idea, and everybody really got behind it and said, yeah, that's what we need to do. And they understood the messages that came with it, which was, for most of us in the business, a 50% pay cut. Because as soon as we got into March, we all agreed that that's what we would do because we needed to protect cash flow in the organization. We also needed to work our socks off to move our order book so that we could deliver it through online mechanisms rather than being in people's facilities. And we managed to get somewhere in the order of about 70% of our order book moved online, and quickly demonstrate to other customers that we could do leadership development work and other things through online portals. Net result of that was that the 50% pay cut that people had elected to take, we said to them, if we get the business performing, then we will pay it back. And by August that year, we started to pay people back the money that they'd put into SA Partners to keep the purpose of the business over that really turbulent period front and center, which is we didn't want to make anybody unemployed. We didn't think that was a set of decisions that we wanted to do. Now, other business leaders took lots of other decisions, but that was the course of action and the route that we embarked on. And I have to say, I'm proud of the people in SA Partners for that piece of mobilization. The other one, from a personal point of view, that works for me on a purpose perspective is I'm a trustee of one of the local air ambulances. All charity donations are welcome to the Great Western Air Ambulance charity. You can't resist having a little bit of promotion. The purpose of the Great Western Air Ambulance is to protect people from the injuries and the effects that may impact them when they are having the worst day of their lives. So people air ambulance are involved with easily having the worst day of their lives. They've possibly had a cardiac arrest. They might have been involved in a road traffic accident. They might have had a fall from height. They are having terrible events happen to them. And the air ambulance provides a service that moves the emergency room to the scene of that event as quickly as possible, and so they can apply life-saving care at the instant. This organisation is full of people, both the medical staff, the charity staff, and the people who work in retail, because we run a number of shops to raise money, who really connect with that sense of purpose, that it's about providing life-saving support to people who are having the worst day of their lives. And as a result, the organisation is incredibly motivated and mobilised, and has great performance, great staff retention, and an exceptional culture, and a great place to work. And I have to say, I get more working and rubbing shoulders with people in that organisation than I think I could ever put back into it, because it reinforces my feeling of worth and value. So just a couple of stories about purpose in organisational settings for me. And the final bit is some questions for you to reflect on. Okay, let's not always work when we're thinking about purpose, about thinking about it at an organizational level in terms of what is the purpose of my organization. Most of you will work as part of a team. Okay, so have a think about what is the purpose of your team. Why does your team exist in the organization? Can you describe it? Can you describe it in a way that you kind of feel a sense that that's getting me here, I'm emotionally connected with it? And how do you know if you're achieving your purpose? Okay, can you think about the things that you need to excel at, your team needs to excel at to achieve its purpose? Do any of the measures that you use tell you whether your team is achieving its purpose? Okay, so have a reflect about those types of things. And if you're coming up with answers that are making you a little bit concerned, give us a call. We're more than happy to have a chat about purpose. I'm available. I think my details are here, and you can come and have a chat. So that's pretty much it from me. I think we're a minute or two ahead of the 30 minutes, so we won't crash through the end of the session. Thanks very much for giving us the time to talk to you. I hope this has been valuable, stimulated a little bit of thinking, and you're all thinking about the purpose of your org, the purpose of your teams, the purpose of yourself, and I wish you the best for the rest of today.
Amazing. Thank you so much for hosting today's session, Robin. And thank you all for viewing this either live or on the recording. For all of our viewers in the US, hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving this week. And don't forget, the Changemakers Bite Size does continue next week. And we welcome Eric Waller to discuss transforming huddles and problem solving and how to become a better facilitator as a leader. So again, thank you, Robin, and thank you everybody for watching.